The Night Stalker. The summer Los Angeles stopped sleeping. In the summer of 1985, Los Angeles stopped sleeping. Windows that once stayed open for night air were shut tight despite the heat. Porch lights remained on until sunrise. Gun sales increased. Neighbors began checking on one another before bed. The city did not know his name yet. They only knew the pattern. He came after midnight. He entered quietly, and he chose houses at random. The first confirmed killing connected to what would become known as the Night Stalker occurred in 1984, but it was in 1985 that fear truly spread. Victims ranged in age from young adults to the elderly. Some lived alone, some with spouses, some in modest homes, others in middle-class neighborhoods. There was no clear profile, no consistent income bracket, no predictable district, just entry through unlocked doors or windows, and then violence. He often approached on foot, dark clothing, sometimes a baseball cap, sometimes gloves. He carried firearms or knives depending on the night. He moved through houses like a shadow, silent until he wasn't. The randomness was what paralyzed Los Angeles. If criminals target specific neighborhoods, people adjust. If they target specific demographics, people rationalize. But when victims appear unrelated, when geography stretches across counties, fear multiplies. In March 1985, an elderly woman was murdered in her home. No forced entry. The attack was brutal. Weeks later, another elderly victim, then another. In some cases, jewelry was taken. In others, nothing of value disappeared. Sometimes there were signs of ritualistic behavior. Sometimes strange symbols were left behind. But at first, detectives did not immediately connect the crimes. Los Angeles in the mid-1980s was vast and fragmented. Jurisdictions overlapped. Sheriff's departments handled some areas. City police handled others. Patterns are harder to see when data is scattered. It was only as cases accumulated that similarities emerged. Victims were often attacked while asleep. Windows left open for ventilation during warm nights. Windows cracked open. Air conditioning was less common. The killer exploited routine. He watched neighborhoods in advance, studied which homes went dark first, which houses lacked security bars, which bedrooms faced side yards. He preferred darkness over confrontation, surprise over struggle. In one attack, a couple was assaulted in their bedroom. In another, a single woman. In yet another, an elderly man shot while asleep. The method varied slightly. The intrusion did not. The media began using the name the Night Stalker. The label intensified panic because it suggested someone moving through the city deliberately, someone hunting. Law enforcement faced mounting pressure. The killer left behind limited physical evidence. In one instance, a shoe print was recovered, an uncommon brand, size 11, Avia sneaker. That detail would later become critical, but at the time, it was just a clue without a face. In some crime scenes, investigators noted symbols drawn, pentagrams or references to satanic imagery. This fueled media frenzy. Talk radio amplified fear. Rumors spread. Parents forbade teenagers from staying out late. Security companies advertised aggressively. Gun ranges filled with first-time buyers. Los Angeles in 1985 was already grappling with crime waves and gang activity, but this was different. This was intimate. Home invasion erodes the illusion of safety more deeply than street crime. It reaches into bedrooms, into moments of vulnerability. Late at night, when ceiling fans turn slowly and houses cool down, silence becomes noticeable. That summer, silence became suspicious. In July 1985, a fingerprint was lifted from a stolen vehicle connected to one of the crimes. The print belonged to Richard Ramirez. He was 25 years old, a drifter, born in Texas, raised in an unstable household, exposed early to violence and disturbing influences. He had moved to California in his early 20s, living transiently, hotels, friends' couches, cheap apartments. He had prior arrests for theft and drug possession, but nothing that prepared the public for what would unfold.
Before his identity was known publicly, Ramirez continued attacking. Victims described a thin man with dark hair, sunken eyes, a strong odor, poor dental hygiene that some later recalled vividly. He sometimes demanded money, sometimes jewelry, sometimes simply entered and attacked without prolonged interaction. In certain attacks, he forced victims to swear allegiance to Satan. These details, reported widely, intensified media sensationalism. But beyond the shock value, the core pattern remained. He chose unlocked entries. He struck between midnight and 4 a.m. He fled before neighbors could react, and he left entire households terrified. The police began coordinating more aggressively between jurisdictions. Task forces formed. Ballistics reports linked firearms used in multiple attacks. The Avia shoe print appeared at several scenes. Detectives canvassed shoe stores, tracked recent purchases. The brand was not widely distributed. It narrowed possibilities. But Los Angeles County holds millions of residents. The field was still vast. In late July 1985, 2 elderly women were attacked in Monterey Park. One survived. She provided a description that matched earlier witness accounts. The composite sketch circulated rapidly. It was broadcast on television, printed in newspapers, distributed to patrol officers. For the first time, the city saw a face. Thin, dark eyes, angular features. The effect was immediate. Tips flooded in, but many were false. Paranoia can distort identification. People began seeing the Night Stalker everywhere, in grocery stores, on buses, at gas stations. The real Richard Ramirez continued moving quietly, sleeping during the day, walking at night, sometimes taking public transportation, sometimes hitchhiking. He did not fit a polished criminal profile. He was erratic, addicted to cocaine, prone to impulsive decisions. But at night, he demonstrated focus, selection, entry, exit. In August 1985, a major break occurred. Ramirez left behind a fingerprint on the rearview mirror of a stolen Toyota. This time, it was clear. The print matched one already in the system from a previous arrest. His name became public: Richard Ramirez. The Night Stalker had a face and a record. Police released his mugshot. Television stations aired it repeatedly. Newspapers printed it on front pages. The city's fear shifted from unknown predator to known fugitive. But that did not reduce danger. It intensified the hunt. Once the name Richard Ramirez was released to the public in August 1985, Los Angeles shifted from fear to pursuit. His face was everywhere. Television broadcasts interrupted programming with updates. Newspapers printed his mugshot in bold ink. Radio hosts repeated the name hourly. The anonymity that had protected him vanished overnight. But before the identification became public, the violence had escalated. In the weeks leading up to the reveal, Ramirez attacked repeatedly. Couples shot in their beds, women assaulted in living rooms, elderly victims beaten without warning. He did not follow a strict victim type. Age ranged widely, neighborhoods varied, income levels differed. This randomness made profiling difficult. The Avia shoe print continued appearing at scenes. Detectives tracked distribution records and learned that only a limited number of that specific model had been sold in the Los Angeles area. It was not mass-produced. The rarity helped narrow investigative focus, but it did not immediately produce a suspect. Then came the fingerprint, lifted from the rearview mirror of a stolen vehicle abandoned after one of the attacks. The print was clear, strong, undeniable. It matched an existing record for Ramirez from a previous arrest. For the first time, they had more than pattern. They had identity. But Ramirez did not know immediately that his name had gone public. He continued moving as if still invisible, staying in cheap motels, visiting acquaintances, traveling by bus between neighborhoods. When he finally saw his face on television in late August 1985, the manhunt shifted into something volatile. Los Angeles was no longer just frightened, it was alert and angry. Residents began watching strangers more closely. The composite sketch had already created suspicion. Now the confirmed photo made recognition possible. On August 30th, 1985, Ramirez returned to Los Angeles after a brief trip to Arizona. He stepped off a bus at the Greyhound terminal downtown. He did not yet know that his image was on every news broadcast. As he walked through East Los Angeles, residents recognized him almost immediately. Someone shouted, another pointed. Within minutes, a crowd began forming. This was not organized law enforcement. This was spontaneous public reaction. People chased him through streets. He attempted to carjack a vehicle. The driver fought back. He was struck by bystanders, beaten, held down until police arrived. The man who had stalked sleeping homes was captured in day broadlight by the very city he had terrorized. The image of his arrest became symbolic, not just police capturing a fugitive, but a community responding collectively. When officers arrived, Ramirez was bloodied but alive. He smiled at cameras, raised a hand with a pentagram drawn on it during court appearances later. But at the moment of arrest, the panic in Los Angeles began to shift into relief. Still, relief does not erase trauma. The list of victims was long. More than a dozen murders, multiple sexual assaults, numerous attempted killings. Survivors carried permanent scars, physical and psychological. Ramirez's pattern exploited something simple: unlocked windows during warm nights, routine, trust in domestic space. He did not need elaborate planning. He needed opportunity. He walked neighborhoods looking for vulnerability. A window slightly open, a door without deadbolt. He entered quietly, often through a rear entrance, sometimes by climbing. He moved through homes with surprising calm, demanding money in some cases, assaulting without warning in others. There was no consistent script. that unpredictability amplified fear. Some attacks included forced declarations of satanic allegiance. Ramirez embraced the label publicly after media began reporting it. He leaned into the image. Courtroom theatrics would come later, but during the summer itself, the horror was less theatrical. It was domestic. A husband shot beside his wife, an elderly woman beaten in her sleep.
A child awakened by gunfire. The Avia shoe became a symbol in its own right. Investigators distributed bulletins asking store owners about recent purchases. They cross-referenced receipts, interviewed clerks. The shoe print tied multiple scenes together conclusively. Without it, the crimes may have remained fragmented. Different jurisdictions might not have connected them as quickly. In the aftermath of his capture, law enforcement reviewed each scene meticulously. Ballistics evidence confirmed links between shootings. Fingerprint matches tied him to burglaries. Stolen items recovered. The picture sharpened. But for the residents of Los Angeles, the sharper image did not erase the months of fear. Parents remembered keeping lights on all night. Neighbors remembered forming informal watch groups. Some residents slept with weapons beside their beds. Security bars were installed across thousands of windows that year. Home alarm companies saw record demand. The Night Stalker had changed physical architecture in parts of the city. Metal bars became common in neighborhoods that previously left windows open. The psychological shift lasted longer than the crime spree. Late at night, the echo of that summer still feels present in the story. Because what Ramirez exploited was not wealth or poverty, it was routine. The assumption that midnight belongs to sleep, that windows can remain open for breeze, that quiet neighborhoods stay quiet. He moved between communities without prejudice, selecting houses based on accessibility rather than status, and that randomness created universal vulnerability. When the manhunt concluded with his capture, the city exhaled. But closure is never immediate. Each victim represented a separate rupture. Each surviving family carried memory into the future. And the city itself retained a lesson about darkness. To understand how the summer of 1985 unfolded the way it did, investigators eventually turned to the early life of Richard Ramirez. He was born in 1960 in El Paso, Texas. His childhood was marked by instability, violence, and exposure to disturbing influences at a young age. One of the most frequently cited influences was an older cousin, a Vietnam War veteran who reportedly shared graphic stories of violence and combat. There were accounts that this cousin showed Ramirez photographs depicting brutality from the war. In at least one documented incident, the cousin shot his wife in front of Ramirez during an argument. Exposure to violence during formative years does not predetermine criminal behavior, but repeated exposure without stability can distort boundaries between imagination and action. By adolescence, he had already begun engaging in petty theft and drug use. He dropped out of school, moved frequently, drifted. His criminal record prior to the Night Stalker murders included burglary and narcotics charges. He was not a model citizen, but he was not yet publicly known as a violent offender. When he relocated to California in the early 1980s, he lived transiently. Cheap motels, friends' couches, occasional day labor. He developed a cocaine addiction. Substance use fueled erratic behavior, but also extended wakefulness, useful for someone who preferred to move at night. Ramirez did not conform to a single psychological category. He did not exclusively target one age group. He did not confine himself to one neighborhood. This unpredictability made profiling difficult. Many serial offenders demonstrate narrow patterns, specific victim types or locations. Ramirez's pattern was broader. His common denominator was vulnerability, unlocked doors, accessible windows, sleeping occupants. He exploited opportunity rather than personal grievance. The satanic symbolism reported at several scenes drew intense media focus. Pentagrams carved on skin or drawn on walls. Verbal references to Satan. In court later, he would flash a pentagram on his palm. But psychological experts have debated how much of this represented belief versus performance. Some argue that he adopted the symbolism as an identity, something dramatic and fear-inducing. Others believe it reflected a genuine fascination. Regardless of motivation, it amplified terror, because it transformed burglary into something ritualistic in public perception. But beneath the symbols, the core remained intrusion and violence. In many cases, he shot victims first to neutralize resistance. In others, he used knives or blunt force. Sexual assault occurred in several attacks, but not all. There was no singular script. The inconsistency itself increased unpredictability. Late at night, when ceiling fans spin and houses settle into silence, the randomness of his selection feels most unsettling. He did not stalk one person over months. He stalked entire neighborhoods, walking streets after midnight, observing which homes were dark, testing doors, lifting screens quietly. He carried firearms when available. If not, he used knives. If not, he used objects within reach. Improvisation was part of his pattern. The Avia shoe print was one of the few consistent physical markers tying multiple scenes together. Investigators traced the shoe model to a limited retail distribution. When his arrest occurred, police found shoes matching the print in his possession. That link strengthened the chain of evidence. After his capture, detectives revisited earlier unsolved cases. Some earlier murders were reclassified as connected. The scope expanded. Ramirez's crime spree spanned roughly 14 months. The summer of 1985 was its most intense phase, but the fear it generated lasted far longer. Psychologically, Ramirez exhibited traits consistent with antisocial personality disorder: lack of remorse, manipulation, impulsivity. He reportedly smiled in court, made dramatic gestures, attempted to control the narrative. But courtroom performance is often superficial. The deeper pattern lies in behavior. He chose times when occupants were most vulnerable. He avoided confrontation during daylight. He fled quickly after assaults. He did not linger long at scenes beyond what was necessary to assert control. Despite media portrayals that leaned heavily into satanic imagery, the core behavior was opportunistic home invasion combined with extreme violence. That combination destabilizes communities because it turns the private sphere, the bedroom, into a site of fear. Los Angeles in 1985 became a case study in how serial crime reshapes urban behavior. Window bars increased. Neighborhood watch groups expanded. Gun ownership rose.
Even after his arrest, many residents kept lights on overnight for months. The Night Stalker became shorthand for vulnerability in darkness. For the victims' families, media attention offered little comfort. Names became headlines, faces circulated, but grief is not reduced by national awareness. Each home invasion was its own world shattered. Each survivor carried memories that extended far beyond the summer. In the broader narrative of American serial crime, Ramirez occupies a distinct place, not because he was the most methodical, not because he had the highest victim count, but because his attacks were spread across such a vast urban area in such a short time. The city felt under siege, and siege implies collective threat. After the arrest of Richard Ramirez in August 1985, Los Angeles did not immediately return to normal. Relief is not the same as restoration. The fear that had spread across neighborhoods did not evaporate overnight. Windows remained locked even during heat waves. Security bars stayed installed. Porch lights burned until dawn. The Night Stalker had changed behavior patterns permanently. For months, residents had gone to sleep wondering if their home would be the next one chosen at random. That randomness was the most destabilizing element. He did not confine himself to one block. He did not follow a predictable demographic pattern. He did not limit his victims by age. Children, elderly couples, young adults, anyone whose door or window offered opportunity. After his capture, police re-examined earlier unsolved burglaries and homicides across the region. Ballistics reports linked multiple shootings. Fingerprints confirmed connections. Stolen jewelry and personal items recovered from his possessions strengthened the chain of evidence. The shoe print, the size 11 Avia, remained one of the most significant physical anchors tying scenes together. Without that print, the crimes might have remained fragmented across jurisdictions. Instead, it became a symbol of the investigation's turning point. During trial proceedings, Ramirez embraced notoriety. He flashed satanic symbols in court, smiled at cameras, attempted to project defiance. But courtroom theatrics do not change the pattern of behavior that defined the spree. The true weight of the case rests not in headlines, but in households. Bedrooms, once considered private, became scenes of violence. Couples who had slept with windows open for decades began installing steel bars. Entire neighborhoods coordinated informal patrols. The summer of 1985 entered collective memory as the season when Los Angeles did not sleep. Late at night, when this story is told slowly, the most unsettling realization is how little separated safety from danger. An unlocked window, a thin screen, a sliding door without reinforcement, that was often enough. He did not rely on complex planning. He relied on accessibility, and accessibility exists in every city. In many serial cases, victims share characteristics. In this case, what they shared was vulnerability in routine, sleeping, trusting the quiet, believing the door was secure enough. The cultural impact extended beyond Los Angeles. National news amplified the fear. Other cities reviewed cold cases. Homeowners across the country reconsidered security habits. The term Night Stalker entered popular vocabulary as shorthand for unseen threat after midnight. Yet beneath the media narrative lies a simpler and heavier truth. Lives ended violently in spaces meant for rest. Survivors carried trauma forward. Families rebuilt without answers that could restore what was lost. The randomness remains the defining feature. If there had been a clear grievance, fear might have been localized, but randomness dissolves boundaries. It tells every household, you could be next. That is why the case still resonates decades later. Not because of satanic symbols, not because of courtroom spectacle, but because it targeted the universal human need for safety in sleep. When the city captured him, not just police, but residents who recognized and chased him, it symbolized something larger, a community pushing back against prolonged fear. Yet fear leaves residue. Even after sentencing, even after incarceration, even after years passed, security bars remained on many windows installed that summer. The architecture of Los Angeles changed subtly because of him, and architecture is memory in metal. The Night Stalker case stands as a reminder that vulnerability often lies in routine, in small decisions, in habits repeated nightly, and that sometimes the most dangerous predators rely not on complexity, but on opportunity. When lights go out and houses settle, the illusion of safety feels natural. But in the summer of 1985, Los Angeles learned that illusion can fracture quietly. One window, one step inside, one city holding its breath. Thank you. In the early hours of May 14, 2008, a college student called his parents after his car went off the road in rural Minnesota. He wasn't injured. He wasn't panicked. In fact, he sounded calm. He told them exactly where he thought he was, said he would walk toward a nearby town, and stayed on the phone with them the entire time. For nearly an hour, they listened as he described what he could see: fields, gravel roads, darkness stretching in every direction. And then, without warning, he said a single word, "Oh," and the line went silent. Imagine this for a moment. You're on the phone with someone you care about. You're guiding them home. You can hear their footsteps, their voice, and then suddenly everything stops. No explanation, no follow-up, just silence. Brandon Swanson was a 19-year-old college student from Minnesota. He had just finished his classes for the year. It was supposed to be a normal night. He had spent the evening with friends, nothing unusual, nothing that suggested anything was wrong. At some point after leaving, his car went off the road. He later told his parents that he wasn't hurt, just stuck. So instead of waiting, he decided to walk. Now think about this. If your car gets stuck in the middle of nowhere at night, would you stay with it or try to find help on your own? Brandon chose to walk. He called his parents and explained the situation. They agreed to come pick him up, but there was one problem. He believed he was near a town called Lind, but he wasn't. He was miles away in a completely different area. And that mistake would become one of the most important details in this entire case. Because while Brandon thought he knew where he was actually walking through unfamiliar terrain. Fields, ditches, gravel roads with no lights, all in the dark. For nearly 47 minutes, he stayed on the phone. His parents drove, trying to locate him. He described what he saw. They followed his directions, but they couldn't find him. They passed roads he mentioned, but he wasn't there. They flashed their headlights, hoping he would see them, but he didn't. Now think about this carefully.
If you're speaking to someone in real time and still can't find them, what does that tell you? Is it just confusion or something more? As the call continued, Brandon mentioned seeing lights. He believed he was getting closer, closer to safety, closer to being found. But then came that moment, the one word, "Oh," and after that, nothing. The line didn't disconnect immediately. The line stayed open, but Brandon never spoke again. His parents called his name again and again. No response. Eventually, the line went dead. That was the last time anyone ever heard from him. Search efforts began almost immediately. Police, volunteers, family. They searched the area extensively. Fields, roads, nearby locations. But there was a problem. They didn't know exactly where to search, because Brandon himself didn't know where he was. His car was eventually found, abandoned, far from where he believed he had been. And that changed everything, because now the question wasn't just, where did he go? It became, where was he really? We'll come back to that final moment on the phone, because what may have happened right after he said, "Oh,"
has been debated for years. And as the search continued, one possibility began to stand out. A possibility that might explain the silence, but also raises even more questions. After the call ended, the search for Brandon Swanson intensified. But from the very beginning, there was a problem that made everything harder: location. Brandon believed he was near Lind, but when authorities later found his car, it was miles away from that town. That meant one thing. Everything he described on the phone was based on a location that wasn't accurate. Now think about this. If you're lost but believe you know where you are, does that make it easier or harder to be found? Because in this case, it made everything more complicated. Search teams focused on the area where his car was discovered. They expanded outward. Fields, roads, ditches. They followed the paths he might have taken. And quickly, they realized something about the terrain. It wasn't simple. There were uneven fields, drainage ditches, areas covered in tall grass, and a nearby river. All of it difficult to navigate, especially in the dark. Now imagine walking through that environment at night. No streetlights, no clear paths, just open land and obstacles you can't see. For nearly an hour, Brandon had been moving through that terrain, talking, describing what he thought he saw. At one point during the call, he mentioned crossing a fence. Later, he talked about walking through fields. These details helped narrow down possible routes, but still, no exact path could be confirmed. Then, investigators focused on that final moment, the word he said before everything stopped. "Oh." It wasn't a sentence, not a cry for help, just a sudden reaction. Now think about this carefully. When someone says a single word like that, what does it usually mean? Surprise? A misstep? Something unexpected? Many investigators and analysts have focused on this exact moment because that word might be the only clue to what happened next. One theory is that he fell. The terrain included deep ditches, some filled with water,
others hidden by grass. In the dark, without visibility, it's possible he didn't see where he was stepping. Another possibility involves the nearby river. If he reached it and tried to cross, the outcome could be very different. But despite extensive searches, no clear evidence was found. No confirmed location where he fell. No definitive trace of what happened after the call. And that's what makes this case so difficult. Because there's no clear break point, no moment where everything becomes obvious. Just a gradual disappearance, ending in silence. Search teams returned again and again over the following days, weeks, months, using different methods, different approaches. But every time they came back with the same result: nothing. Now think about this. How does someone remain missing after such an immediate and focused search? Is it possible that something was simply overlooked? Or is there another explanation entirely? Because while the environment provides some answers, it doesn't explain everything. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of another person, no indication that he had met someone, and yet he was gone. We'll come back to the theories because there are several possibilities that people still debate today, and each one tries to explain that final moment. But before that, there's something else to consider. Because sometimes the hardest cases are not the ones with too many clues, they're the ones with almost none. In the years following the disappearance of Brandon Swanson, investigators, volunteers, and even independent search groups returned to the area again and again, each time with the same goal: find something that had been missed. Because in cases like this,
the answer is often close, closer than anyone expects. But despite repeated searches, nothing definitive was ever found. No personal belongings, no clear trail, no evidence that pointed to a specific outcome. And that left investigators with theories. The first and most widely discussed was accidental, that Brandon, walking through unfamiliar terrain in the dark, simply fell. The area was filled with hazards, deep ditches, uneven ground, water channels that could be difficult to see even during the day. Now think about this. If someone falls into a concealed ditch or water-filled area at night, how likely is it that they would be found immediately? Especially if the search is focused slightly off from the actual location. Because remember, Brandon's parents were searching near Lind, while he was actually miles away. That gap in location could mean that early searches missed the correct area entirely. Another theory focuses on the river. Some believe that Brandon may have reached it, attempted to cross, and slipped. Water changes everything in a search. It can carry away evidence, hide it, make recovery much more difficult. But even with that possibility, there has never been definitive proof, and that's where the uncertainty remains. Because while these explanations are possible, they are not confirmed. Now think about this carefully. Is a likely explanation the same as a proven one? Because in this case, the difference matters. There have also been more speculative theories, possibilities involving another person, an unexpected encounter, something unplanned. But investigators have never found evidence supporting that. No signs of a struggle, no witness placing someone else in the area, And that keeps the focus returning to the environment itself, the land, the darkness, the isolation, because sometimes circumstances alone are enough. Still, one detail continues to stand out, that final word, "oh." It suggests something immediate, something sudden, not a long event, not a drawn-out situation, just a moment, a single moment where everything changed, and that moment is the center of the mystery. We'll come back to what this case represents, because it's not just about what happened, it's about how quickly things can change and how easily someone can disappear, even while speaking to the people trying to help them. More than a decade later, the disappearance of Brandon Swanson is defined by one thing: a voice, a phone call that lasted nearly an hour, a real-time connection between a son and his parents that ended without warning. No struggle heard, no clear sign of danger, just a single word and silence. Oh. Everything about this case comes back to that moment, because it suggests something sudden, something unexpected, not something planned, not something gradual, just a shift. Now think about this. If someone disappears while actively talking to others, does that make the case easier to understand or more confusing? Because you have a timeline, you have communication, and yet you still don't have answers. Over the years, search efforts have continued. New methods, new technologies, renewed attempts to locate even the smallest clue. But the result has remained the same: no confirmed trace. His car was found, his phone call was documented, his path was partially reconstructed, but the final piece, what happened after that last word, remains unknown. Many believe it was an accident, a fall into terrain that concealed him, an encounter with something he couldn't see in the dark. Others still question whether something else could have happened, something not yet considered. And that's where this case stays, between explanation and uncertainty, because even the most logical answer is still only a possibility, not a confirmed truth. So now, let me ask you something. If you were on that phone call, hearing his voice in real time, what would you have done differently? Would anything have changed the outcome? Or was that moment already beyond anyone's control? And one more thing to think about. Do you believe this case will ever be solved? Or will it remain one of those rare situations where the answer exists but is never found? Because in the end, this story isn't just about disappearance. It's about how quickly certainty can turn into confusion, how a normal night can become something else entirely, and how sometimes, even when we are closest to someone, they can still be lost. Thank you for listening.
Faith, fraud, and a house of lies. On the morning of May 5th, 2009, a quiet subdivision in Columbia, Illinois, was interrupted by flashing lights. Police cruisers lined the street. Neighbors stood in clusters at the edge of manicured lawns. Yellow tape stretched across the entrance to a home that just hours earlier had looked like any other. Inside, 3 bodies were found: a mother, 2 young boys, strangled in their beds. The father had called 911. His voice was urgent, controlled, but shaken. He said he had returned home from the gym and found his family unresponsive. Their names were Sherry Coleman and her sons Garrett Coleman and Gavin Coleman. Sherry was 31, Garrett was 11, Gavin was 9.
The father, Christopher Coleman, told officers that threats had been made against the family. He insisted someone had targeted them. And in the house, investigators found something unusual. On the walls, written in red paint, were threatening messages. The words suggested religious hatred, references to faith, warnings that you have paid. It appeared staged to look like an extremist attack. But even in the earliest hours, something felt off. The home showed no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no pried doors, no clear disturbance consistent with a stranger moving violently through the house. Sherry and the boys were strangled with ligatures. There were no defensive wounds suggesting prolonged struggle. It looked controlled, deliberate, intimate. Christopher Coleman was not an unemployed drifter. He had worked as a bodyguard and security director for a prominent televangelist. His life revolved around public faith and protection. He was accustomed to discussing threats. He told investigators the family had received disturbing emails weeks prior, messages warning of danger, messages referencing religion. He claimed he had reported these threats. Neighbors recalled seeing police presence at the home days earlier. It seemed credible. But staged scenes often lean heavily into narrative, and narrative can unravel under scrutiny. In the days leading up to the murders, Christopher Coleman had been involved in an extramarital affair. Investigators would later uncover hundreds of messages exchanged with another woman. Messages discussing divorce, messages describing a desire to start over, messages that hinted at dissatisfaction with his marriage. But at first, however, the community believed they were witnessing a targeted hate crime. The red writing on the walls was visceral. It demanded interpretation. But the timeline raised questions. Christopher said he left for the gym around 5 a.m. He returned around 6 a.m. That window, 1 hour, was the alleged time of the attack. Yet no neighbors reported suspicious vehicles, no strangers seen entering or exiting. The subdivision was not isolated farmland. It was residential, close-knit. Even early morning activity tends to be noticed. Investigators examined Christopher's behavior. He appeared composed. He gave interviews. He spoke about faith, about protection, about loss. But composure does not equate to innocence, and grief manifests differently in different people. The crime scene writing became central. Handwriting analysis was conducted, forensic examination of paint strokes. The red substance was not blood. It was paint from inside the home. The messages were written on interior walls, not scrawled in haste, but applied in strokes that seemed measured. A stranger committing triple homicide and then calmly staging religious messages inside the house would require time. Yet the estimated time of death aligned closely with Christopher's morning absence. No alarm system had been triggered. No security camera footage revealed intrusion. The garage door had not been forced. If an intruder entered, it was through an unlocked access point, or with a key. The boys were found in separate bedrooms, Sherry in another. The killer moved room to room. Strangulation requires proximity, hands on cord, pressure maintained. It is not distant violence, it is personal. Late at night, when this story is told slowly, the tension lies in contradiction. A father who reports threats, a staged hate message, no forced entry, a narrow timeline, and an affair unfolding quietly in parallel. Christopher Coleman's communications with his mistress would later become critical.
In text messages, he described marital dissatisfaction, spoke of wanting freedom, mentioned life without financial burden. Life insurance policies on Sherry added another layer, substantial sums, enough to reset a life. But in the early hours of May 5th, none of that was publicly known. All the public saw was a father on the front lawn, 3 bodies inside, red words on walls, faith invoked as motive, and a town shaken. In the hours after the murders in Colombia, investigators did what experienced homicide detectives always do. They worked backward. The walls bore red messages meant to signal religious extremism, threatening phrases, references to punishment. But staged scenes often lean heavily into explanation, and explanation invites scrutiny. The first major question, entry. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered glass, no pried doors. The Coleman home was not left open overnight, and according to neighbors, nothing unusual had been seen in the early morning hours
Of May 5th. If an intruder entered, he either had access or moved invisibly. The second question, timeline. Christopher Coleman told police he left for the gym around 5 a.m. Surveillance footage later confirmed his presence at a gym in a neighboring town. But footage timestamps became critical. Security cameras showed him arriving later than he initially reported and leaving earlier than expected. The gap narrowed. Digital breadcrumbs matter. Phone records showed that Christopher had sent a text message shortly after leaving the house, a routine message, but forensic analysis would later suggest that his phone activity during the morning contradicted portions of his initial statement. Investigators also examined the threatening emails he claimed to have received weeks earlier. These emails referenced violence, religious anger, warnings of harm. They had been sent from anonymous accounts, but when forensic specialists traced IP addresses and account creation data, something emerged. The emails were linked back to computers associated with Christopher. The narrative began to shift. The threats may not have been from an external extremist. They may have originated inside the marriage. At the same time, detectives uncovered the affair. Hundreds of messages exchanged between Christopher and another woman. Intimate messages, future-oriented messages, discussions of divorce, financial constraints. One message described wanting a fresh start. Another referenced life insurance. Life insurance policies on Cherie Coleman totaled substantial amounts. Combined with child policies, the potential payout exceeded $1 million. Money is not always motive, but motive rarely ignores money. The digital evidence became increasingly difficult to dismiss. Christopher had searched for ways to create anonymous email accounts. He had sent messages to himself posing as threats. He had reported those threats to local police prior to the murders. This established a paper trail, a preemptive explanation. If harm came to the family, it would appear externally motivated. But the writing on the walls complicated that illusion. Forensic analysis showed the red paint used in the messages came from inside the home, a container stored in the garage. The brush strokes were steady, deliberate. There were no fingerprints from unknown intruders, no foreign DNA, only the absence of struggle. The strangulation method itself is revealing. Strangulation is quiet. It leaves minimal external noise, but it requires proximity and sustained pressure. The boys were found in their beds. There was no sign they had left their rooms, no overturned furniture, no defensive wounds suggesting prolonged fight. Cherie was found in another bedroom, also strangled.
No signs of forced sexual assault. No evidence of ransacking. The house remained orderly. The killer moved calmly from room to room. Late at night, when this story is told slowly, the emotional center tightens around intimacy. Strangulation is not distance. It is hands or cord near skin. It is seconds stretching into minutes. It is looking at someone while they lose consciousness. That requires emotional detachment or resolve. Investigators reconstructed Christopher's movements on May 5th, minute by minute. Phone records, gym entry logs, surveillance footage, vehicle data. The more they aligned the timestamps, the less room there was for an unknown intruder. The alleged hate threats began to look like scaffolding, a narrative built in advance, a story constructed to survive initial questioning. But stories fracture under forensic light. When confronted with inconsistencies, Christopher maintained innocence. He insisted someone had targeted his faith, that the threats were real, that an intruder had entered. But without forced entry, without unknown DNA, without witness sightings, the theory weakened. The affair intensified suspicion. In messages to his mistress, he described dissatisfaction with his marriage, spoke of stress, financial concerns, and a desire for a different life. Divorce would have been costly, public scandal damaging. Life insurance offered liquidity and sympathy. Family annihilation cases often follow similar arcs. The perpetrator seeks escape from responsibility. Financial pressure compounds emotional dissatisfaction. Rather than separate, they eliminate and stage. By late 2009, investigators had enough to charge Christopher Coleman with the murders of Cherie and his sons. The staged hate crime theory collapsed under forensic light. The emails he claimed were threats had originated from accounts he created. The IP traces linked back. The timeline aligned too tightly. The gym alibi narrowed. The house showed no sign of external intrusion. The red writing became less a warning and more a performance.
As investigators built their case against Christopher Coleman, the pattern that emerged was not chaotic. It was structured, and structure is often more disturbing than rage. Family annihilation cases rarely erupt without warning signs. There were usually stress fractures beneath the surface, financial strain, marital dissatisfaction, extramarital attachment, reputation risk. Christopher's life had begun to split into two narratives. Publicly, he was a husband, father, and security professional tied to a prominent religious ministry. Privately, he was deeply involved in an affair. Text messages between him and his mistress revealed increasing emotional distance from his marriage. He described his wife, Cherie Coleman, as controlling in some exchanges. He spoke of wanting out, of starting over. But divorce is expensive, especially with children, and in his case, public image mattered. A high-profile separation could damage professional standing. Life insurance, however, provided a different path. Policies covering Cherie and the boys were active. Substantial payouts, enough to erase debt, enough to build a new life. Investigators uncovered evidence that Christopher had searched online for ways to make emails appear anonymous. He had created accounts from devices linked to him. The threatening messages, framed as religious hate, were sent from those accounts. He had then reported those threats to law enforcement weeks before the murders. That act is critical because it shows pre-staging. He planted the seed of external danger. He established the narrative before the crime occurred. When family annihilators stage scenes, they often over-explain. They want investigators to see motive immediately. But authentic hate crimes typically include chaos, forced entry,
graffiti applied in haste, external damage. In the Coleman home, the writing appeared deliberate, the brushstrokes controlled. The paint came from inside the garage. There were no foreign footprints, no broken locks. The digital evidence became the backbone of the prosecution. Phone pings, computer logs, IP address tracking, gym surveillance timestamps. The timeline narrowed around the early morning hours. Christopher left for the gym, but the window between estimated time of death and his verified location grew uncomfortably tight. Strangulation leaves physical markers, petechial hemorrhaging, ligature impressions. Autopsies confirmed that Cherie and the boys had been strangled manually or with ligatures. The boys were attacked in separate rooms. There was no evidence of prolonged struggle, which suggests surprise, sleep, or trust. Late at night, when this story is told slowly, the hardest element to confront is proximity. Strangling a stranger during a robbery is horrific. Strangling your children requires something colder. It requires calculation that overrides instinct. Investigators also reviewed Christopher's behavior immediately after the murders. His 911 call was urgent but controlled. He emphasized the threatening messages, directed attention toward an external extremist narrative. He mentioned prior police involvement due to threats. It sounded rehearsed. As the investigation tightened, Christopher maintained innocence. He denied writing the emails, denied staging the scene, denied harming his family. But digital forensics does not rely on emotion. It relies on trace. IP logs tied the threatening emails to devices in his possession. Search histories aligned with planning. Affair communications revealed motive. Financial records showed potential gain. The mask began to slip. Community reaction shifted from sympathy to disbelief. Neighbors who had stood beside him during the initial shock reevaluated memories. Friends questioned conversations from weeks earlier. Faith community members struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the charges filed. Family annihilation often carries a secondary shockwave. The idea that the protector is the perpetrator destabilizes trust more deeply than external crime, because it suggests danger from within. The prosecution would eventually argue that Christopher chose annihilation over divorce, that he preferred sympathy over scandal, that he staged hate to misdirect. The defense maintained that evidence was circumstantial, that digital traces could be misinterpreted, but as the layers accumulated, the picture hardened. This was not a random extremist attack. It was a controlled internal act. The red writing on the walls became symbolic not of hate crime, but of calculated deception. The house in Columbia returned to quiet, but it was not the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of absence. 3 bedrooms empty, a yard unchanged, neighbors passing by with a different understanding of what had occurred inside. When the trial of Christopher Coleman began, the narrative the prosecution presented was simple in structure, even if devastating in implication. There had been no masked intruder, no religious extremist, no unknown enemy scaling fences before dawn. There had been a husband and father inside the home. Digital evidence, forensic timelines, financial records, and staged threats converged into one argument. The danger originated from within. The threatening emails, once framed as external hostility toward faith, were traced back to accounts he created. IP addresses linked to devices in his possession. The red writing messages on the walls, meant to imply ideological hatred, came from inside the garage. The gym alibi narrowed the time window rather than expanding it. The affair messages painted motive. Divorce meant public failure and financial burden. Life insurance meant liquidity and sympathy. Family annihilation cases often follow a chilling psychological path. Control over narrative is prioritized over preservation of life. Christopher did not snap in visible rage. He constructed an explanation before the crime. He reported threats weeks earlier. He laid groundwork. That planning became one of the most damaging elements of the prosecution's case. Jurors were shown messages in which he described wanting a different life, a life free from marital strain, a life without what he framed as emotional suffocation. Yet instead of leaving, he allegedly chose elimination. The verdict came in 2011, guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There would be no future restart, no insurance-funded second chapter. The courtroom conclusion provided legal resolution, but legal resolution does not erase the image of two boys in their beds, of Garrett Coleman and Gavin Coleman losing their lives before adolescence was complete. Nor does it soften the image of Cherie Coleman strangled in her own bedroom. Late at night, when this story is told slowly, the most unsettling detail is not the red writing.
It is the ordinariness of the house. A suburban home in Columbia, Illinois. Neighbors mowing lawns, school buses arriving in the morning, a kitchen table where homework was once done. Family annihilation feels uniquely disturbing because it collapses the boundary between protector and predator. There is no forced entry, no broken glass, no external chaos, only a door closing behind the person who lives there. Christopher Coleman's case fits a broader pattern seen in similar crimes: financial pressure combined with emotional dissatisfaction, an extramarital relationship offering perceived escape, public image complicating separation, and the belief, however distorted, that eliminating family is a solution. But elimination is not escape, it is exposure. The staged hate crime narrative might have succeeded briefly if digital forensics had not traced the emails, but modern investigations leave fewer shadows: IP addresses, cell phone data, search histories, timestamps. Technology dismantled the fiction. The red writing meant to redirect suspicion became evidence of planning. In the years since, the Columbia subdivision has returned outwardly to routine. New residents move in, children ride bikes, mailboxes stand upright. But houses remember, not physically, but socially. Neighbors carry stories, communities absorb lessons. The Coleman case endures not because of spectacle, but because of deception layered over intimacy. A father who called 911, a staged threat invoking religion, a narrative designed to protect reputation, and beneath it, calculated violence. When the lights go out and houses settle into quiet, the story lingers for a reason. It reminds us that the most dangerous narratives are sometimes the ones built in advance, that staging often reveals more than chaos, and that proximity does not equal safety. Thank you for listening.